Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to decode something pretty amazing. Exactly how the world's major religions evolved and changed before the year 1450 CE. It's this incredible journey through history, politics, and human spirituality, and we're going to use historical sources to make sense of the whole shebang. Let's get into it. Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever actually thought of world religions as living, breathing things? I mean, it's super easy to assume that ancient faiths are just these rigid, monolithic blocks of unchanging rules, right? But today, we're going to completely challenge that assumption. Our thesis here is that faiths act way more like living organisms. They adapt, they grow, and yeah, sometimes they split apart. So first up, let's look at how these faiths evolved before 1450, focusing on growth, synthesis, and schism. You see, when early congregational faiths, religions that literally connected communities across vast distances, started to spread, they didn't just passively translate their texts, they changed completely. Religions retain their core characteristics, sure, but they adapt through profound internal shifts and massive external cultural interactions. And why does this matter to us today? Well, understanding how religions adapted historically actually gives us the key to decoding the complex cultural and political landscapes of our modern world. It basically tells us exactly how we got here. Let's move to our first major case study, Hinduism. This is a brilliant example of synthesis and adaptation. Hinduism is a fascinating example of a religion that survived and thrived over millennia, not by fracturing into a million disconnected pieces, but by actively absorbing and synthesizing incredibly diverse beliefs. Let's look at how this builds over a massive historical sweep. We start way back with the Indus Valley Civilization around 3300 BCE. Then we hit the Vedic period of the Indo-Aryans around 1750 BCE. Fast forward to 600 BCE, and new ascetic movements like Buddhism and Jainism start popping up. And finally, we get the Puranic synthesis around 320 CE, which is often called the Golden Age. So the origins of Hinduism are actually anchored in a deep, prolonged fusion of incredibly diverse Indian cultures spanning thousands of years. So what actually triggered all this synthesis? Well, Brahmanism, the early Vedic religion, was facing a genuine existential threat. On one side, you had the rise of ascetic renouncer movements, namely Buddhism and Jainism. On the other side, they were losing royal patronage for their complex Vedic rituals as society urbanized. So how did the religion save itself? By embracing a broad, popular synthesis. It incorporated local tribal deities, and through its support behind the rise of personal devotion, also known as bhakti. This happened through a process called Sanskritization, where local deities were identified with the big Sanskrit gods. For example, Vishnu subsumed the cults of Narayana. Think about the micro to macro pivot here. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. Regional, localized beliefs in gods were brilliantly woven into a unified but still highly diverse Hindu tapestry. It was essentially the ultimate survival strategy through inclusion. Now, synthesis isn't the only way religions evolve. Let's look at global shifts and splits, which are a worldwide human phenomenon. Because as faiths interact with empires, politics, and shifting geography, their structures inherently adapt or fracture. Evolutionary pressure on religions is totally global. Take Judaism, for example. It faced the immense pressure of repeated conquests of its small states. The historical results of that? The diaspora. Jewish communities scattered across Europe, Asia, and Africa, but they stayed unified by community rabbis rather than a centralized priesthood. Meanwhile, early Christianity had to navigate the fragmentation of the vast Roman Empire. That pressure eventually led to the Great Schism of 1054, splitting the faith into the Catholic and Orthodox churches. The heavy pressure of history literally forces the shape of the faith to change. Which brings us to our second deep dive, Islam, and a completely different evolutionary path driven by a massive succession crisis. 632. I really want you to lock this year into your mind. This is the year the Prophet Muhammad died. And crucially, he passed away without a male heir and without leaving a clear, unambiguous statement about exactly who should lead the Muslim community next. That silence opened up a deep political wound that forever changed the course of history. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing the resulting traditions side by side. On the left, Sunni Islam formed around the idea of leadership by communal consensus, relying on a decentralized religious authority known as the ulama. But over on the right, Shiite Islam is grounded in the belief that leadership required divine lineage through the family of Ali, with spiritual guidance coming directly from imams. What we are looking at here is how a purely political dispute over succession gradually, over decades, hardened into two entirely distinct theological traditions. And then things hit a breaking point. The Battle of Karbala in 680 CE transformed that political dispute into a profound, lasting spiritual wound. At Karbala, Hussein ibn Ali, who was the Prophet's grandson, was martyred alongside his supporters. This specific historical anecdote is absolutely vital because it crystallized Shiite identity around themes of immense suffering, martyrdom, and the ultimate pursuit of justice. And you can see the direct result of that historical split when we look at the massive global scale of the faith today. Currently, Sunnis make up roughly 87 to 90% of the population, while Shiites make up about 10 to 15%. Today, we see major Shiite populations concentrated in places like Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, and Azerbaijan, while Sunni populations span the entire globe from Indonesia all the way to North Africa. But there's a third element of Islamic diversity that cuts right across those political divides. Let's talk about Sufism, the inward dimension. So the crucial point here is that Sufism is the mystical dimension of Islamic belief. It seeks divine love and knowledge through direct personal experience. And I want to be super clear here, it is not a separate sect. Sufis exist within both Sunni and Shia traditions. Originally, it just started as a pious reaction against the growing worldly wealth and luxury of the early Islamic empires. I absolutely love this quote from the historical sources. Like the shell of a walnut, necessary to protect what is inside, but not the nut itself. It's just such a beautiful Sufi metaphor. It perfectly illustrates how they view formal religious observances like fasting or pilgrimage. The rules are the shell. They are absolutely necessary to protect the faith. But the inner, experiential truth of directly knowing God, that is the nut. That's the core. Let's actually walk through how the Sufi path evolved. It kicked off in the 7th century with asceticism, basically rejecting all material luxury. Then it evolved to emphasize divine love. This was a concept articulated beautifully by the female mystic Rabia, who preached unconditional devotion without hoping for paradise or fearing hell. Finally, by the medieval period, it organized into formal brotherhoods or spiritual orders, guided by famous poets and mystics like Rumi. So it grew from this austere early piety into a really warm, highly organized mysticism. Okay, to wrap things up, let's look at how all this diversity actually means living vitality, built on shared foundations. We've looked at both schisms and syntheses today, but remember, these forces do not destroy a religion's core, because despite all the divides, shared Islamic foundations remain completely intact. The Quran as the word of God, the 5 pillars, the absolute oneness of God, or Tawheed, and Muhammad as the final prophet. This brilliantly illustrates that despite the historical Sunni-Shiite divide and despite the deep mystical layers of Sufism, a massive foundation of unified belief is still held together by over 2 billion people today. Here is the big takeaway from this explainer. Diversity within a faith is not a sign that it's fragmenting or falling apart. It's the sign of a living, vital tradition actively trying to answer the most profound human questions. Whether it's Hinduism creatively absorbing local cults over millennia to form a unified cultural tapestry, or Islam deeply dividing over a political succession crisis while still retaining its core theological creed, religions are incredibly dynamic, adapting entities. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Does understanding the historical origins of these religious divides change the way you think about them today? When you see modern conflicts or cultural differences in the news, or even just in your own community, try applying this historical lens. You might just see a living tree of faith, still growing and still beautifully branching out. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.